Good morning, crime community. I've had a little problem logging on here, but I guess I'm live. I don't know. I'm just here to read Poe. R.H. Horne. In ancient mythology, the giants were meant to typify various energies of nature. Pursuing, we suppose, this idea, Mr. Horne has made his own giants represent certain principles of human action or passion. Thus, Orion himself is the worker or builder and is the type of action or movement itself, but in various portions of the poem, this allegorical character is left out of sight, and that of speculative philosophy takes its place, a mere consequence of the general uncertainty of purpose, which is the chief defect of the work. Sometimes we even find Orion a destroyer in place of a builder, as, for example, when he destroys the grove about the temple of Artemis at Delos. Here he usurps the proper allegorical attribute of Rexagorgon, the second of the seven giants named, who is the breaker down, typifying the revolutionary principle. Tarsus, the third, represents the mob, or more strictly, waywardness, capricious action. Harpax, the fourth, serves for rapine. Biastor, the fifth, for brute force. Encelon, the sixth, for the chainer of the wheel, for conservatism. And Akinatos, the seventh, and more elaborated, for apathy. He is termed the great unmoved, and in his mouth is all but the worldly wisdom of selfishness of the tale. The philosophy of Akinatos is that no merely human exertion has any appreciable effect upon the movement, and it is assuming to perceive how this great truth, for most sincerely we do hold it to be such, speak out from the real heart of the poet, through his kinitos, in spite of all endeavor to overthrow it for the example of the brighter fate of Orion. The death of Akinatos is a singularly forcible and poetic conception, and will serve to show how the giants are made to perish generally during the story in agreement with their allegorical natures. The great unmoved quietly seats himself in a cave after the death of all his brethren, except Orion. Thus, Akinatos sat from day to day, absorbed in indolent sublimity, reviewing thoughts and knowledge o'er and o'er, and now he spake, now sang unto himself, now sank to brooding silence from above, while passing time and rock touched, and it oozed, petrific drops, gently at first and slow, reclining lonely in his fixed repose, the great unmoved unconsciously became, attached to that he pressed, and soon a part of the rock, there clung the experienced, still strong hands, descended from Orion, made large roads, and built steep walls, squaring down rocks for use. The italicized conclusion of this fine passage affords an instance, however, of a very blamable concision, too much affected throughout the poem. In the death of Aratus, Harpax, and Escalon, we recognize the same exceeding vigor of conception. These giants conspire against Orion, who seeks the aid of Artemis, who in her turn seeks the assistance of Phoebus. The conspirators are in a cave with Orion. Now, Phoebus, throw the cave, sent a broad ray, and lo, the solar beam filled the great cave with radiance equable, and not a cranny held one speck of shade. A moony halo round the Orion came, as of some pure protecting influence, while the intense light glared the walls and roof. The heat increasing, three giants stood, with glazing eyes fixed. Terribly the light beat on the dazzled stone, and the cave hummed. With reddening heat, till the red air and beard of Harpax showed no difference from the rest, which once were iron black. The sullen walls then smoldered down the steady oven heat, like that with care attained when bread was ceased, its streaming and displays an angry tan. The appalled faces of the giants showed full consciousness of their immediate doom. Soon the cave, the potter's furnace glowed, and killed the largest bricks, and thus remained. And while Orion in his haloed clasp in some invisible power beheld the clay, and these his early friends changed. Life was gone. Now sank the heat, the cave walls lost their glare, the red lights faded, and the halo pale. Around him, in chilly air expanded, there stood the three great images in hue of chalky white and red, like those strange shapes in Egypt's ancient tombs, but presently each visage and each formed with cracks and flaws was seamed and lost countenance, break up, and with brief toppling forward prone they fell. The deaths of Rexagon and Biaster seem to discard the allegorical meaning of altogether, but are related with even more exquisite richness and delicacy of imagination than those of the other giants. Upon this occasion, it is the jealousy of Artemis which destroys. But with the eve fatigue o'ercame the giants as they slept. Denise with her rolling clouds, starless the glooms, but o'er a narrow rift, once drawn apart, showing a field remote of violet hue, the high moon floated, and her downward gleam shone upon the upturned giants' faces, rigid, upper features loose their neither jaw, their arms cast wide with open palms, their chest heaving with some large engine. Now then lay their bloody clubs with dust and hair begrimed, their spears and girdles and long-nosed throngs. Artemis vanished, all again was dark. With day's first streak Orion rose, and loudly to his companions called, but still they slept. Again he shouted, yet no limb they stirred, though scarcely 7 strides distant. He approached and found the spot so sweet and clover flower, when they had cast them down as now arrayed, with many-headed poppies like a crowd of dusky Ethiops in the magic cirque, which had sprung up beneath them in the night, and all entranced the air. There are several minor defects in Orion, and we may as well mention them here. We sometimes meet with an instance of bad taste in a revolting picture or image, for example, of this edition. Not fearing swift, brimful of raging life, sniffling they lay in pools of jellied gore. Sometimes, indeed, very often, we encounter an altogether purposeless oddness of foreignness of speech. For example, as in Dodonius once, ere driven thence by Zeus for that Rexagon burnt some oaks. Mr. Horne will find it impossible to assign a good reason for not here using because pure vagueness of speech abound. For example, one central heart wherein time beats twin pulses with humanity. Now and then, sentences are rendered needless, obscure, with more evolution. Star rays they first played o'er my blinded orbs, even as they glance above the lids of sleep. Who else had never known surprise, nor hope, nor useful action, but with who has no grammatical antecedent and would naturally be referred to sleep, whereas it is intended for me, understood or evolved in the pronoun my, as if the sentence were written thus, rays, or first played o'er the blinded orbs of me, who, etc. It is useless to dwell upon so pure an affection. The versification throughout is generally a very remarkable excellence. At times, however, it is rough in no purpose, and ever tended to some central point in some place, not more could I understand. The shadow of the stag stoops to the stream, swift rolling towards the cataract, and drinks deeply. The above is an unintentional and false Alexandrine, including a foot too much, and that a Trotsky in place of the iambus. And here we have the little, utterly undefinable anomaly of half a foot too little. And Eos ever rises, circling the varied regions of mankind, etc. And these are mere inadvertencies, of course, for the general handling of the rhythm shows the profound metrical sense of the poet. He is perhaps somewhat too fond of making the sound an echo to the sense. Orion embodies some of the most remarkable instances of this on record, but if smoothness is the true rhythm of the verse, be sacrificed, the sacrifice is in an error. The effect is only a beauty, we think, where no sacrifice is made In its behalf, it will be found possible to reconcile all the objects in view. Nothing can justify such lines as this. As Snake Song's mist-stoned hollows thus has taught me, we might urge as another minor objection that all the giants are made to speak in the same manner with the same phraseology. Their characters are broadly distinctive, while their words are identical in spirit. There is sufficient individuality of sentiment, but little or none of language. We must object, too, to the personal and political allusions to the Corn Law question, for example, to Wellington's stature, etc. These things, of course, have no business in a poem. We will conclude our fault finding with the remark that, in a consequence of the one radical error of conception upon which we have commenced at length, the reader's attention throughout is painfully diverted. He is always pausing amid poetical beauties, in the exception of detecting among them some philosophical, allegorical moral. Of course, he does not fully, because he cannot uniquely appreciate the beauties. The absolute necessity of reperusing the poem in order thoroughly to comprehend it is also most surely to be regretted, and arises likewise from one radical sin, but of the beauties of this most remarkable poem, that, what shall we say? And here we find it a difficult task to be calm, and yet we have never been accused of enthusiastic encomium. It is our deliberate opinion that, in all the regards, the loftiest and holiest attributes of the true poetry, Orion has never been excelled. Indeed, we feel strongly inclined to say that it has never been equaled. Its imagination, that quality which in all is the most refined and most elevating and most august character, and we here deeply regret that the necessary limits of this review will prevent us from entering at length into specification. In reading the poem, we marked passage after passage for extract, but in the end, we found that we had marked nearly every passage in the book. We can now do nothing more than select a few. This from introduces Orion himself, and we quote it not only in an instance of refined and picturesque imagination, but as evincing the high aristical skill with which a scholar in spirit can paint an elaborate picture, but of a few brief touches. A scene in front, two sloping mountain sides displayed in shadow, one and one in light, the loftiest on its summit now sustained, the sunbeams rain like a mighty wheel, half seen, which left the forward surface dark, in its full breath of shade, the coming sun, hidden as yet behind the other mount, slanting transverse, swept with an eastward face, catching the golden light. Now, while the peal of the ascending chase told that the route still midway rent the thickets, suddenly along the broad and sunny slopes appeared the shadow of the stag that fled across, followed by a giant shadow with a spear. These shadows are those of the coming Orion and his game. We who can fail to appreciate the intense beauty of this heralding shadows, nor is this all. This hunter of shadows, he himself a shade, is made symbolical or suggestive throughout the poem of the speculative character of Orion, and occasionally of the pursuit of visionary happiness. For example, Orion, possessed by Merope, dwells with her in a remote and dense grove of cedars. Instead of directly describing her attained happiness, his perfected bliss, the poet, with an exalted sense of art, for which we look utterly in vain in any other poem, merely introduces the image of the tamed or subdued shadow stag, quietly browsing and drinking beneath the cedars. There, underneath the boughs, mark where the gleam of sunrise through the roofing's chasm is thrown upon a glassy plot below, whereupon the shadow of the stag stoops to the stream, swift rolling toward the cataract, and drinks. Throughout the day unceasingly it drinks, while ever and anon the nightingale, now waiting for the evening, swells his hymn and one sustained and heaven aspiring tone, and when the sun has vanished utterly, arm over arm the cedars spread their shade with arching wrists and long extended hands, and grave wart fingering lengthening in the moon above the shadowy stag whose antlers still hung o'er the stream. There is nothing more richly, more weirdly, more chastely, more sublimely imaginative in the wild realm of political literature. It will be seen that we have enthusiasm, but we reserve it for pictures such as this. His brother dead is engaged alone in expatriating the beasts of Chios. In the passages we quote, observe in the beginning the singular lewdness of detail, the arrangement of the barriers, etc., by which the hunter accomplishes his purpose, is given in a dozen lines of verse, with far more perspicacity than ordinary writers would give it as many pages of prose. In this species of narrative, Mr. Horne is approached only by Moore in his Alpha In the later portions of their extract, observe the vivid picturesqueness of the description. 4 days remain. Fresh trees have felled and wove, more barriers and fences inaccessible, to fiercest charge of droves and to overleap. Impossible. These walls you see so arranged that to a common center each should force. The flight of these pursed, and from that center diverged three outlets, one and wide expanse, which from the rocks and inlet forest led. One was the clear-skied windy gap above a precipice, the third a long ravine, which through the steep slopes down the seashore ran, winding and then direct into the sea. 2 days remain, Orion in each hand, waving a torch, his course at night began, through wildest haunts and lairs of savage beasts, with long-drawn howl before him droop the wolves, the panthers, terror-stricken, and the bears, with wonder and gruff rage, the desolate crags, leering hyenas, griffin, hippogriff, sulked and sprang madly at the tossing braids. Flashed through the midnight nukes and hollowed cold, sullen of fire from flint or crashing thickets, with crouched head and curling fangs, dashed the wild boar, gnashing forth on with reckless impulses, while the clear purposed for fox crept closely down into the underwood to let the storm, whate'er its cause, pass o'er through dark fens, marshes, green rushy swamps, the margins reedy. Orion held his way, and rolling shapes of serpent and of dragon moved before him, with high-reared crests, swan-like yet terrible, and often looking back with green-like eyes. All night Orion urged his rapid course, and the vexed rear of the swift droving din, and when the dawn had peered, the monsters all were hemmed in barriers. These he how overleaped with fuel through the day, and when again night darkened and the sea of gulf-like voice sent forth the barriers of all points he fired, mid prayers of Hemophitos and his ocean sire, soon as the flames had eaten out a gap in the great barrier fronting the ravine that ran down to the sea, Orion grasped two blazing boughs, one high in air he raised, the other with its roaring foliage trailed behind him as he sped onward. The droves of frantic creatures with one impulse rolled before the night, devouring things of flames, with multitudinous voice, and downward swept into the sea, which now first knew a tide, and ere they made one effort to regain the shore, had caught them in its flowing arms and bore them past all hope. The living mass, dark heavening o'er the waves restlessly, at length in distance seemed a circle small, midst which one creature in the center rose, conspicuous in the long and red quivering gleams that from the dying brands streamed o'er the waves. It was the oldest dragon of the fens, whose forky flag wings and horde-crested head o'er crags and marshes regal sway it held, and now he rose up like an embodied curse from all the doomed, fast sinking, some just sunk, looked landward o'er the sea and flapped his vans into Poseidon, drew them swirling down Poseidon Neptune is Orion's father and lends him his aid. The first line italicized is an example of the sound made echo to sense, and rest we have merely emphasized as peculiarly imaginative. Orion thus describes a palace built by him for Vulcan. But ere a shadow hunter I became, a dreamer of strange dreams by day and night, for him I build a palace underground of iron black and rough as his own hands, deep in the groaning disemboweled earth, the tower broad pillars and huge stanchions and slant supporting wedges I set up, aided by the Cyclops who obeyed my voice, through which the metal fabric rang and pealed, in orders echoing far like thunder dreams, with arches, galleries, and domes all carved, so that great features started from the roof, and lofty colonnes, or sat and downward gazed, and those who stood below and gazed above. I filled it into center frame a hall, central in that a throne, and for the light forged mighty hammers that should rise and fall, or slanted rocks of granite and of flint, worked by the torrent. For those passages down I chasm I hewed, and here the god could take mist showery sparks and sways of broad gold fire, his lone repose lured by the sounds he loved, or casting back his hammered heads till they choked, the waters cursed, enjoyed, if so he wished, midnight tremendous silence and iron sleep. The description of the hell and lost paradise is altogether inferior in graphic effect, in originality, in expression, in the true imagination of these magnificent to these unparalleled passages. For this assertion, there are tens of thousands who will condemn us as heretical, but there are a chosen few who will feel in their inmost souls the simple truth of the assertion. The former class would at least be silent could they form even a remote conception of that contempt with which we hearken to their conventional jargon. We have room for no further extracts of length, but we refer to the reader who shall be so fortunate as to procure a copy of Orion. One day at noontime, when the chase was done, it is the descriptive of a group of lolling hounds intermingled with sylvans, fauns, nymphs, and oceanides. We refer to them also where Orion, enamored with the naked beauty of Artemis, is repulsed and frozen by her dignity. These lines end thus, and ere the last collected shape he saw of Artemis dispersing fast amid dense vapory clouds, the aching winteriness had risen to his teeth and fixed his eyes like glistening stones on the congealing air. We refer especially to the description of love, to that of the Bacchanalian orgy, and that of drought succeeded by rain, and that of the palace of Eos. Mr. Horne had a very particular and very delightful facility of enforcing or giving vitality to a picture by some one vivid and intensely characteristic point of touch. He seizes the most salient feature of his theme and makes his feature convey the whole in combined naivety and picturesqueness of some of the passages thus enforced cannot be sufficiently admired. For example, the archers soon, with bow arm forward thrust and all sides twanged, around above below, now it is thus thrusting forward of the bow arm, which is the idiosyncrasy of the action of the mass of archers. Again, Rexaragon and his friends endeavor to persuade Akinitos to be king. Observe the silent refusal of Akinitos, the particular passiveness of his action, and we may be permitted the paradox. Rise, therefore, Akinos, thou art king, and saying, in his hand we place a spear, and though against a wall, till were set aslant, flatly a long spear fell around the ground. Mere again, Merope departs from Chios in a ship, and as it sped along, she closely pressed the rich globes of her bosom on the side, o'er which she bent with those black eyes and gazed into the sea that fled beneath her face. The fleeing of the sea beneath her face is one of those gazes onto it from the ship's side of his idiosyncrasy of the action of the subject. It is that which chiefly impresses the gazer. We conclude with some brief quotations at random, which we shall not pause to classify. Their merits need no demonstration. They gleam with the purest imagination. They abound in picturesqueness, force, happily chosen epitaphs, each in itself a picture. They are redolent in all for which a poet will value a poem. Her silver sandals glanced eyes, the rays, as doth a lizard playing on the hill, and on the spot where she that instant stood, night but the bent and quivering grass was seen. Above the isle of Chios, night by night, the clear moon lingered ever on her course, covering the forest foliage where it swept, and its unbroken breath along the slopes, with placid silver edging leaf and trunk, where gloom clung deep around, but chiefly sought with melancholy splendor to illume the dark-mouthed caravans where Orion lay, dreaming among his kinsmen, the ocean realm below and all its caves and bristling vegetation, plant and flowers, and forest in their dense petrific shade, where the tides moan never sleep that never comes, a faun who on a quiet green knoll sat somewhat apart, sang a melodious ode, made riches of harmonies and hidden strings. Tauruses seized a satyr with intent, despite his writhing freaks and furious face, a dash him on a gong like that amidst the struggling mass of Encelon, thrust a pine heavy and black as Charon's ferrying pole, o'er which they lay like a bursting billow fell, then round the blaze their shadows brandishing afar and athwart o'er the level space and up the hills, 6 giants held portentous dance, his safe return to corporal sense by shaking off these nets of moonbeams from his soul, old memories slumberously hung above the purple line of distance is the east, while odorously glistened the teardrops of the new fallen shower. Sing on, great tempest, in the darkest sing, the madness of a music that brings calm into my central soul, and from its waves that now with joy begin to heave and gush, the burning image of all life's desire, life and absorbing fire-breathed phantom god rises and floats. Here it touches on the foam. There oaring o'er it, ascending swift, starward when sweeping toward the hemisphere upon the lengthening javelins of the blast. Now a sound we heard, like some well-known voice in prayer, and next an iron clang that seemed to break great bonds. Beneath the earth shook us to conscious life. It is oblivion in his hand that not knows he of this, a dusky purple flower droops o'er its tall stem. Again, see, he wanders into mist, and now is lost within his brain what lovely realms of death as pictured, and what knowledge through the doors of his forgetful of all the earth, a path may again, and we have positively forced to conclude. It was our design to give Orion a careful and methodical analysis, thus to bring clearly forth its multitudinous beauties of the eye of the American public. Our limits are constrained us to treat it as an imperfect and cursory manner. We have had to content ourselves chiefly with assertion, with our original purpose was to demonstrate. We have left unsaid 100 things which a well-grounded enthusiasm would have prompted us to say. One thing, however, we must and will say in conclusion. Orion will be admitted by every man of genius to be one of the noblest, if not the most noblest, poetical work of the age. It defects every trivial and conventional, its beauties intrinsic and supreme. That is the end of today of Edgar Allan Poe, of Mr. Horne's lesson on Orion. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a nice day.